Sick of getting blisters? Stop slipping and just be comfortable with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Great fit, great comfort, lots of grip, and an even better price. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
For the first time ever, there's now a mid-cut F50. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new women's Adidas F50 Elite Mid, which, as the name would suggest, is a mid-cut variation of the brand new F50, adding in a primeknit mid-cut collar, super stretchy material as you would expect it to be, along with some other small modifications to make this function as a pair of mid-cut football boots, all of which I would argue aren't all that meaningful to the end result in terms of fit, feel, and performance. Nor does it change the price tag, because the mid-cut F50 Elite retails for the same $260 as the normal low-cut and laceless variations. With the big question here being, why did we really need a mid-cut version of the F50? Because not only is this the first time Adidas has made a mid-cut F50, it's realistically the first time we've seen a pair of mid-cut speed boots from them, period. So with that in mind, I want to go over all the modifications that have been made to the F50 Elite to make it functional as a mid-cut boot. Of course, because this is a women's model, there's a few questions that I'm sure a lot of you guys have around that, all of which will be answered in today's video as we determine whether or not you should be considering a low cut or a mid-cut variation of the new F50. So if you're interested in learning more, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you enjoy these unsugar-coated, brutally honest reviews on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. So first things first, I want to make something very clear in regards to the mid-cut version of the F50, specifically because it is technically a women's model, which means the sizing is different, but that's realistically the only variation you're going to find when comparing it to a normal F50 Elite. And I guess what I mean by that is the shaping of the football boot is no different whatsoever. They're not narrower, they're not wider, the volume is exactly the same. Simply the only difference is the way the sizing works, which we'll talk about a little bit more during the on-feet portion of the video. In other words, I see absolutely no reason why the mid-cut version of the F50 Elite couldn't release in a men's variation, or to be more specific, in men's sizing. So we'll see what Adidas does with that down the line. As far as what their logic was in making a women's version of the F50 as a mid-cut football boot in the first place, that's something we don't really have a definitive answer to. I can only assume that based on sales data, because Adidas hasn't really been making women's specific models that consistently over the last couple years, or at least hasn't been promoting them to the extent that they have with this model. I'm assuming that their data and general research and perhaps sales numbers reflect that most women prefer a mid-cut boot over a low-cut boot, and that's realistically all that I think it really comes down to. Where speaking of the collar, it must be said, yes, it's made from a stretchy primeknit material. Is it visually the most aesthetically pleasing? In my opinion, no, but the feel of it in terms of quality is just fine. And the opening, I would say, is quite large. It is kind of a signature mid-cut Adidas shape in that the opening is a little bit larger than what you're gonna find from a lot of Nike mid-cut models. And in a lot of ways, the general shaping of it, especially being long and flat across the top, really reminds me of the days of the Adidas A16, which realistically was the first super popular mid-cut boot from Adidas. So a little bit of a tie-in to another kind of classic from the brand, a modern classic, if you will, in the return of the F50, despite the F50 never really being a mid-cut football boot. But I think the perception with mid-cut boots in general, guy or girl, is that they do provide some level of ankle support. And please keep in mind that all ankle support provided by this mid-cut football boot, or any other one for that matter, is purely what you perceive rather than what is actually reality. In other words, if having a pair of mid-cut football boots makes your ankles feel more secure, then by all means wear them. But the reality is, this is not designed to restrict the mobility of your ankle whatsoever. And when you're talking about true ankle support, it's that restriction of mobility that actually makes your ankle less susceptible to injury. No mid-cut collar on any pair of football boots is designed to prevent you from moving your ankle freely, and these are no different. Also, if you're wearing them on turf, which you probably shouldn't be with the FG stud pattern, they can often help with not letting those little rubber pellets get inside of the boots, and obviously the aesthetic side of it is something that you're either going to love or hate, but when it comes to true kind of tangible performance benefit, there really isn't one. So if you clicked on this video hoping for the answer to what's better, the mid-cut or low-cut F50 Elite, the answer to that question is that it really is a matter of personal preference, because when it comes to performance, there is no difference. However, because of the implementation of the mid-cut collar, there are some differences in the overall construction which do impact the feel of the mid-cut F50 compared to the low-cut one. Of course, the Fiber Touch upper with that sprint web micro texturing running across the surface does remain identical to what you'll find from the laced as well as laceless variations of the F50 Elite, and it's still fantastic here, no complaints whatsoever. However, because you do have what is now a one-piece enclosure rather than kind of more of an independent standalone tongue with that internal structure, A, you don't have the tongue, B, you no longer have the internal structure, and C, you now swap out what is a more traditional kind of single lace hole setup for a dual lace hole setup, which is typical of what we've seen from pretty much every brand, including Adidas, in the past X Crazy Fast lineup, when you have more of a one-piece enclosure like these have, where the central portion of the upper is now filled in with some really thin elasticated primeknit material, and you have a little bit of kind of like a fuse reinforcement towards the bottom, very similar to what you'll find on the laceless version of the F50 Elite. The end result is that this does feel a little bit tighter in terms of how it wraps your foot, just because the way that these lace up kind of locks the tension a little bit better, and because you also have this fuse material at the bottom, as insignificant as it might seem, it doesn't allow this portion of the forefoot to stretch quite as easily as the standard low-cut model. So in terms of fit and feel, it ends up feeling more like the laceless variation, but of course with the adjustability and extra lockdown that you get from the normal low-cut laceless. So realistically, if you were trying to decide between the laced and laceless variations of the low-cut F50 Elite, the mid-cut version kind of feels like a combination of the two. And for those that will ask if they can pull out the laces on the mid-cut model and wear them as laceless boots, do keep in mind that this primeknit material through the midfoot is significantly thinner and more stretchy than this primeknit material on the actual laceless model. In other words, this provides decent lockdown. This without laces feels super loose. Moving to the rear, despite its mid-cut appearance, it's pretty much the same base design as the low-cut model in terms of construction. You just have the material extending up higher rather than ending in a low-cut design. And then internally, things are mostly the same, where you have that nice padded heel liner and that really soft microfiber. They didn't add the micro texturing, or at least that little pattern on the heel like you'll find on the normal low-cut variations, but that really doesn't have any impact on anything, so I'm not disappointed that it's not there. I think the reason for not including it is just because it's harder to see with the mid-cut collar. And then another modification that is going to be apparently specific to the women's variation of the mid-cut F50 is the extra cushion insole, where you can see it's the same liner on the surface, super soft, but it's made from basically the same foam. It's just a little bit thicker all the way through. So the idea here is to give you some extra cushion, and compared to the normal comfort insoles that you get with the men's variation, the difference is maybe 0.5 millimeter to 1/4 millimeter, not significant enough to where you're actually going to feel the difference, but it's a nice insole nonetheless. And if you don't like the extra thick insole, they still include the normal speed insoles that you would normally get in the men's versions of the F50s as extras inside the box. And then as for the Sprint Frame 360 base, nothing is different whatsoever, where historically from Adidas we have seen kind of women specific sole plates and stud patterns. Not the case here. You still get that external heel counter made from plastic, kind of mimicking that OG F50 Adizero design. It's still the same kind of more flexible sole plate than what we've seen from Adidas speed boots over the last several generations. And then of course the FG stud pattern is again kind of a nod to the OG F50 in terms of maybe not being as aggressive as what the speed boot market has kind of gone towards in the last several years, where you still get blades in the heel, you still get some blades at the tip of the toe, but they've gone for more of this kind of rounded shape with a bladed edge, similar to the Nemesis line if we really want to compare it to a past Adidas model, where the traction is still excellent, but you have a little bit more of that freedom to twist and pivot with your foot planted, rather than just having kind of super aggressive blades everywhere, where the idea is just to have as much bite as possible. If that's your thing, maybe F50 isn't the boot for you, but if you just want a really well-rounded stud pattern, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this Soleplate setup. And then there's the weight, where obviously the mid-cut model does feature a little bit of extra material, so surely it weighs more. The question is, by how much? Both in the same size. Technically, an 11 US women's is the equivalent of a men's size 9.5 US. More on that in just a second. We'll start off with the mid-cut version of the F50 with the extra cushion insole. They weigh in at 7.6 ounces, the equivalent of 215 grams. Remember those numbers, and we'll throw on the laced low cut variation, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.6 ounces, the equivalent of 188 grams with the speed insole. However, if we throw in the included speed insoles into the mid-cut model, you can see that they now weigh in at 7.1 ounces, the equivalent of 202 grams. Meaning that with the same insoles, the low cut model is about 14 grams lighter, which I wouldn't say is a super noticeable amount of weight, certainly when the boots are on feet, but it is interesting to point out how much additional weight that extra cushion insole does have, because it's one of those things that I don't think a lot of people factor in when it comes to the overall weight of a football boot. When it comes to the fit and feel on feet, obviously Adidas is targeting women with this specific model, although it must be said the width as well as the shaping of the boot is no different from a normal pair of men's sized F50s. The only thing that's different here is the sizing, where this particular pair is a women's 11 US, which is 1.5 sizes up from the men's size that I normally wear, which is a 9.5. When you do that 1.5 size jump, you end up with the exact same length, and because the overall last is the same and the sole plate tooling is the same, the fit of the boot ends up being identical. As far as how the mid-cut modification changes how these feel compared to the low-cut model, very little. I think through the heel, the lockdown is pretty well the same. Because of the lacing system not coming up super high, you get a little bit of bulging kind of at the side of the ankle. Again, very similar to the low-cut model, although something that I would say is a little bit unusual for a mid-cut football boot. So kind of like a minor design flaw, but not one that affects comfort or the feel of the boots. It's just something that when I look down on my feet and can see the bulge at the side, it's not something that is aesthetically all that pleasing, although it is something that you do see to a certain extent with the low cut variation as well. And then like I mentioned, because of that one piece upper construction with the dual lace hole setup and that little bit of kind of fuse material at the bottom lacing position, this does have a little bit more of a shaping and feel on your foot that relates this version a little bit closer to the laceless model than the low cut regular model, if that makes any sense at all. I think the vast majority, if this is the only version that you'll try on, none of those details are actually going to matter, because from a fit and feel perspective, they're super comfortable football boots. I think this Fiber Touch upper really is a nice combination of pliability, kind of giving you that sock-like feel, but also being super thin. It moves nicely with your foot and generally just requires no break-in time whatsoever. From a width perspective, they're going to have a decent amount of width to them. I think for somebody that likes a tighter fitting pair of football boots, obviously something in the speed category is typically going to deliver on that. And the F50 is no different, although I don't think they're quite as tight as some other speed boots out there. So if you want that snug fit without them feeling like they are suffocating your feet, this is a really nice overall shape and a width that is going to work for most people as long as you don't have excessively wide feet. And then again, women's sizing, go up 1.5 sizes if you're looking for the men's equivalent, and you're going to have the exact same length. So in conclusion, I'll keep things short and sweet. Did we need a mid-cut version of the F50? Probably not. Is the mid-cut version of the F50 good? Yes. Is the mid-cut version of the F50 any better? No. Should you buy the mid-cut version of the F50 over the low-cut version? Well, for most people, probably not, but if you really like mid-cut football boots, yeah. It definitely didn't need to exist. It improves upon nothing that the normal F50 already had on offer, but for the sake of options for the consumer, I can't be mad at it.